Welcome back and good evening. If you've just joined us, this is ANN7 Prime. My name is Cindy Mabi. Our top story, the ANC's fifth policy conference is just a few days away, where the party will decide its policies for the next 5 years. Join Africa News Network as we track the ANC in its next transition. The health of the education system in South Africa is desperately calling for a relook. The basic education system, along with the higher education, has a lot of room for improvement. President Jacob Zuma earlier focused on the need for a robust education system in the country. However, there's still a lot to be achieved. Let's take a look at the government's priorities in its fifth policy conference.
The discussion around education, health, science and technology papers ensure that there is continuity of political thought and analysis between discussions of the fourth and those to come of the fifth National Policy Conference. There is a need for the ANC to rekindle the spirit and practice of accountability in members and leaders of the ANC, alliance and in deployees and implementers of programs of the ANC in the organization, in legislature and in the public service.
Well, I think the most important thing is that the summaries that have been presented have just extracted some of the key points from the policy papers. So I think it's going to be in the commissions where the membership have the opportunity for a very detailed discussion on both the perspectives presented in the commission paper, in the policy papers, as well as the proposals that have been tabled. And what I would hope would emerge is a clear view from the PGC, from the Free State, on how the Free State responds to each of the proposals that have been put forward.
The health sector must continuously strengthen measures to improve the quality of care delivered by health practitioners in the public and private sectors, plus draft a policy to curb high costs of medical insurance and litigation against medical malpractice.
It's one area where we're trying to do our best. We're introducing the national health insurance. We've got three provinces in three regions, districts, where we're piloting it. I think sites, we have one site in Gungundlovu and other site in Newcastle. So we are trying our best to respond to challenges we are facing.
We have addressed in the last 5 years the scourge of HIV/AIDS. Now people who are HIV positive, it's no longer a death sentence to them. There's medication that they can get free on a daily basis. So we are addressing the health issue so that they can be guaranteed.
Despite the great progress recorded in the basic education sector, there are challenges that require attention. These include lower than expected quality of educational outputs and outcomes, and the efficiency of the system in general. The dropout and repetition rates, particularly in grades 9 to 12, social challenges such as teenage pregnancy, bullying in schools, drug and substance abuse, violence, corporal punishment, and health-related challenges such as TB and HIV and AIDS. An analysis of the ANC policy throughout the years and its amendments sees
if the ANC has to address the issue of education, it can no longer be an issue of access. It should also be an issue of content and quality. And we also see young people also raising an issue that you've opened these doors, but when we go into those doors, we don't find ourselves represented. So the young people are talking about the decolonization of higher education. Effectively to say, this education that you have opened for us, it's still a colonial education. We need to challenge it. We need to see ourselves represented. But we also need it to be transformed. And they have also asked that in this government, given our history, we should have a free higher education. Whether the government is going to be able to afford it, but what the ANC should be doing on the education side, it should be listening to the people.
Policy discussions around education, health, science and technology are set to ensure that the ANC stands accountable for the improving lives of South Africans. Giovanni Machane for ANN7, Johannesburg.
And a poll question for this evening, we're asking if tertiary education should be made free, and you can go to our website, that's ann7.com, and vote. Your reply will then be shared at the end of the show. ann7.com, yes or no with your response, should tertiary education be made free? Joining us in studio is Dr. Ramnik Aluwalia, Head of Higher Education HIV AIDS Program. And we also have the General Secretary of the South African Democratic Teachers Union, and that is Mr. Mukwena, I beg your pardon, Muleleke. And we have Udo Huza, who is a political analyst and correspondent. Good evening to you, gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us. Just where maybe we'll start with you, Professor, in terms of why the education system, especially in urban or rather township and domestic, or rather rural areas, is so shoddy, for lack of a better word.
Well, the ANC Policy Conference on Education and Health seems to be the same on everything as before, so there will be no changes, in my observation. There seem to be no new strategies coming forward to date, with no changes envisaged. The ANC policies, as they stand, would most likely be reinstated. So there's little room for improvement for the townships in the rural areas.
All right, but maybe Mr. Maluleke, from the Democratic Teachers Union, you've seen it come and go, various policies, best international practice, as you're told, outcome-based education. What has gone wrong? Is it just the fact that we don't have a tailor-made solution to deal with our unique situation, or are we just adopting what the rest of the world is selling us?
Well, South Africa has to learn from the other part of the world, except that we cannot import those conditions from those parts of the world. We need to have our own strategies in terms of how we implement those particular policies and making sure that they are able to work for ourselves. But critically here, it is that I agree with Udo that, look, the conference is going to just be ticking the boxes again, because there's no more debate about policies, because, you know, rural schools, your township schools, the issue here are three things that we must look at. One is that the Department of Education has not complied with what is required by the regulation from the Public Service and Administration, which says that they have got to develop a specific human resource planning that is very specific for education. Now, why specific? Because then it has got to take into account the needs of the schools in those particular rural schools, their socio-economic context, okay? So that then it informs the allocation of resources, the tools that the schools must be given, so they are informed by the needs that are identified by the communities, are identified by the school, instead of this global way of resourcing the school. So the school in the rural area with the current funding model is not going to change in any way, because the funding model is informed by the so-called equitable share formula. So it is not going to address the issue of unemployment, inequality and poverty, which is still characterizing these schools in the rural schools and as well as in the townships.
So when you say equitable share, is this in terms of budget allocations without necessarily taking into account the populace perhaps in a particular area, whether their socio-economic needs are more dire than the other?
Yes, because when you do a global allocation of funding or resources, and then you don't look at the needs of the school, that it must inform what you need. Let me just give you an example. If you are in the deep rural area, you have got parents who are not staying at home, who are working in Marikana, who are working in the Platinum Belt. They are not at home. So who is going to assist these particular children to be able to access education? So you need to take that into account when you allocate resources to then say, instead of giving one teacher, like you would have given in a school in Rambek, one teacher teacher in terms of 40:1, the ratio. You need to give that school more teachers, more assistants, more support, because you need to ensure that it's not about access, it's about quality. So the learner needs to be assisted.
Dr. Ahluwalia, but why has that, I mean, it just seems like such an intricate detail to want to focus your planning and assessing where the need is, how much money is allocated, with the desired result. It seems that that has been overlooked.
See, I think my request is, when the conference happens, is to emphasize that education is the only way we can prevent many epidemics or problems and challenges that we have in South Africa. Now, the emphasis on education has to be very severely looked, both at the basic education and at the higher education. Now, for example, I just give you an example that I've just written an article around that the educated South Africans will be a force of transformation in coming South Africa. One of the reasons is because if you see, if I'm going to be educated, all right, and now if I say in 5-7 years down the line, if I'm not protected and I die off, I have a child which will be born as an orphan and probably will again go into poverty. I hold the center key. And similarly, as any black African, you will agree that we all pay black tax. A black tax is like my mother phones me and says, Ramneek, you have to look after your brother's child. You have to look after your sister's child, because you are the one who has educated yourself. You have gone through the system and grown through it. Now, I have many responsibilities just besides my child. If something happens to me, so the overlook is about how we get yourself educated, how you make you survive, and how you ensure that more people come out of the poverty through getting into education. So the education will remain a very critical element in the conference.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Dr. Ahluwalia, in the sense that, you know, a little education is better than no education. So it's more the access that we're emphasizing as opposed to looking at the quality, because perhaps the reason why we're sitting with so many graduates out of a job is that if you take, for example, maybe the former Bantustan qualification versus a Rhodes or Wits, there'll always be preference for the more prestigious institution. So there is I think it's more skewed towards the resource sector of society as opposed to looking at where the need really is. Udo, I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Indeed. In addition to that, there are two factors as well. Pardon me. You know, in a time of pre-elections, there's a conference coming up in December, pre-elections and election time in 2019. Many things are being said for the public to follow, for the public to listen and to clap hands and cry viva and all these things. But will these things be delivered upon? And that is something there should be a monitoring team should be actually deployed to monitor these words that were spoken by leading politicians who are just there for vote garnering. Then also, as far as the market is concerned, our educational system in this part of the world is not focused on what is really needed. So a degree in philosophy, a degree in dreams and what have you, all these strange esoteric educational systems mean nothing. What will I do as a mining sector? Employ a person with a philosophy degree. So we are educated away from the market.
Yeah, and Mr. Malu, like maybe to just take it back, I remember then Finance Minister Trevor Manuel talking about the proverbial Thandi, and I think there was also another analogy he used about a set of twins that are born, one is neglected and the other one, you know, has been affirmed and loved and encouraged, that the informal sector, or primarily the black majority, are that twin that has been neglected and that has been disposed of, if you will. And that's now we're trying to recover. How long can we still have those kind of, you know, lovely words and phrases and not get us anywhere? Where's the proverbial Thandi today?
Look, I don't know how long it will have to take us, because it just takes about political will, all right, to change the things that are not working. We cannot be continuing to be ticking the boxes. I mean, I hate going to a conference where I'm just going to be told that we are opening a school every 2 weeks. What does that mean to an ordinary child who has got to cross the river and sometimes not being able to arrive at a school? It's not answering the question. Is that quality now is what we need to be focusing on, and for us to do that, we need to change the policies that did not work. And I'm not talking about the outcome policies. I'm just talking about implementation policies. The current fiscal policies that we are having in the country are not geared towards a developmental state, because they are not having redress policies that we can say, now we are going to have a very radical redress policy that is going to look at these particular poor schools, poor communities, and be able to give them a real education, not just access, but quality education in terms of sports and recreation facilities, quality teachers that are really trained and are supported. Because when you look at the comparison between those twins, is that the other twin, the parents are participating, they're making sure that the class sizes are smaller, so that then they're able to be educated. The other twin is being neglected because the class sizes continuously are growing in the African communities, in the black communities, and so for me, it's the change in policies, and I have already stated that we need to change certain policies. But we are going to this particular conference, there's not going to be a change. We're going to be told there's a budget, therefore you need to make sure that you work out of that particular budget. For me, that's not a developmental trajectory. That's not radical enough. We need them to agree that that twin cannot continue to be hoping, because it's not going to last long before people lose faith in government, and now they have already lost trust that they can say things but they don't implement, and we cannot have that kind of a situation. There's too much negativity in our country, and we need to change that.
Is it about reparations? Is it about, I mean, if you look at former Model C schools, which are government schools, well-resourced, and as you were saying, they've got the sporting facility, the teacher ratio is balanced, kids are given individual attention, they can develop their potential, and the same is not afforded to what has historically been the most denied, oppressed, marginalized communities. Why is there no greater focus where the need is? I just keep coming back to that.
Well, I'd like to say political will, it's the easiest but yet the most difficult. If you take Zimbabwe for a change, why would an ANC-led government look at Australia for any educational policy and education, as an example? Why don't they just go to Zimbabwe? Zimbabwe until 2000 was amongst the top 3 countries in the world for the best education in the world. What did President Mugabe do with the Zimbabweans? If you come to South Africa today, just here in South Africa, the best educated remain the Zimbabweans working in South Africa. They literally restructured the entire service industry of this country. And if Zimbabwe would come right now and the Zimbabweans would return to Zimbabwe, this service industry in this country would implode. So something has been done absolutely extremely well in Zimbabwe. So why doesn't South Africa, with political will, implement Zimbabwe's model?
Yeah. Going back to the Freedom Charter as well, that no child should be denied access to education, and that free education, tertiary including, for the indigent, those that qualify, need to be assisted. We've seen resistance more and doublespeak on whether it can or cannot happen, the impact it will have on very well established institutions, taking away their appeal internationally. Again, these are things that are possible. Dr. Aluwale.
No, I think definitely, according to there is a will. I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of work that has happened over the last 2 years towards trying to ensure that there is, after the students have spoken around, the higher education has made its statement very clear from the student population. One of the biggest fear that we have learned now is that the engagement with youth is very important. The engagement with student community is very important. The student demands needs to be spoken about and engaged. We've just come out of a conference with HE-AIDS, which we just conducted, the first youth conference, where it was totally engaged around what are the needs and desires of the young student within the university or at an TVET college. And the aim was that we cannot be disconnected with our population. We need to listen to the population and engage with the population. So I think the upcoming conference needs to understand there are specific demands around free education. What do they mean around for a child? Does it just mean giving an education? But it's not about how the child in the university then face that education, because he or she has to come from a poor household into a university. Free education, does it only mean an education with just the books around, or is it just a qualification? It also involves a lunch for them, a residence for the child, and a travel from the college to the place from where it is. Where does the parent stop as a guardian, and where does the government come and step in? Because for a young child, both the roles are very critical for any free education to happen. A parent or a guardian, right from the government support on grounds.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly, that it is a collaborative effort. Yes. And the over-reliance on government itself won't yield the desired results. Why then... Why is there so much more focus that government needs to provide all of these things, where we know that the private sector is equally able to come to the table? We know that there are salary disparities where there's still slave wages, if you want to call it that. The parents of those very children are expected to access the quality education at a level of a professional that earns 10 times more. You know, I mean, I think we're chasing the same desire to have a South Africa that is stable, that is productive, but we cannot do that if the black child, African black specifically, is perpetually denied. Remalulek.
Look, we cannot deny the fact that, yes, private sector has to come in and assist government in terms of providing the resources. The issue for me is that, do you have a policy that would then enable that kind of an implementation, that you say to the banks, you say to multinational companies, this is what you need to pay to ensure that education is funded in the country. So you need that policy. You need political will. Again, for me, is that you need that political will where people are not afraid of taking decisions. They've got to take decision and be able to roll out the implementation of those particular decisions. And we evaluate and we monitor and come back and say, for this particular phase, we have been able to do that. But that thing. Clearly, it is that if we are not going to look at the issue of ECD, early childhood education or development as they call it, and make it the true foundation for education, for now you are still neglecting the poor, because you are saying the practitioners must be paid 2,500 or 5,000, and so there is no formalization. And the policies in Mangaung was very clear: formalize the employment of these particular practitioners, make sure that they're highly educated, make sure that they have got the benefits, so that you are then able to transform the education. So obviously it's still affecting who? It's still affecting the poor, because those who are not able to take their children to a better early childhood center where they can be ready for schooling is always going to be the African, the black poor, and so forth. And then we were saying that must. So I'm saying that must change. We need a reckless leadership is what we must have in this country, where we'll be saying from this year and up to that, but this is what we're going to do to ensure that we change all these policies and implement them. So. Yeah. You're right.
All right, joining us on the line, we have Re Matakanya, General Secretary of the National Association of School Governing Bodies. Good evening to you, and thanks for joining us. I'm not sure if you were privy to the rest of the discussion, but essentially what the policy conference needs to deal with in the long run to have a material difference in the township and rural area schooling system. Your input and how you can push the policy makers to make a radical change.
Good evening, Cindy. Good evening, GS. Yes. As National Association of School Governing Bodies, we feel that what the General Secretary has already said, we fully support that. Firstly, there must be a political will, and also then they must fund all the sectors. Like, for instance, he has already spoken about the ECD practitioners. And ECD practitioners are very critical to us, because once you get the foundation correct, then you know that now you should not worry about the higher grades. Then once you get the foundation correct, but you cannot get the foundation correct if then you don't have happy practitioners. So I'm supporting fully that we have to have the practitioners who are properly qualified, who are going to be properly paid, who are secured. They know that now when they go to work, their work is saved. Now, also, question of parents comes into play. Question of parents comes into play as well. That parents must be brought on board so that they support education, and once it's supported by parents, then we know that now we will achieve quality learning and teaching, so that Parents should not vote with their feet, and then they feel that the school next to where they're supposed to be does not have quality. Then they traveled all the way to look for quality learning and teaching. Also, we must look into the question of South African School Act. The question of the SGBs also, they must continue. They must account at the end of their term. So we agreed that now the entry point must be a child. However, then the parent must complete the term of office, because if they don't complete the term of office, there will be no accountability at the end. And the schools, as they are referred to be as community public schools, we feel that now traditional leaders also, particularly in the rural areas, must also be part of the education, and so that they are able to decide with the community what is best for their children, what is best for the education of our children, so that it will at the end help the country. So that's our position.
To leave it there, thanks indeed. Just very briefly, I mean, there are also centers of excellence, schools that do thrive, albeit in very distressed conditions. I mean, I can talk about Canon Rakale in Guatemala Springs, where I was educated at Township School, or Sekerbos Rand in Nigel, for that matter. It also took passionate teachers who would recognize that talent and nurture it as well. So we're not just brushing everybody with the same brush, that it's all doom and gloom. If you can cite or maybe encourage those that under the circumstances to carry on, because, you know, our future depends on it.
It's important, I believe, that one should also then make contact with the various chambers of commerce and industries and chambers of mines, foreign and local, to make a contribution into a special trust fund that could actually enhance such education and would actually create a bonus system for the teachers who do really well on an annual basis, so that there's a good teacher will get a house, for example, a fully furnished house, and then a bad teacher will get a rented house.
Or rather fired.
Or rather fired.
Yeah.
There are many things you can do. I believe one can just sit down, think it through, and have a special committee that advises the Ministry of Education.
Yeah. Dr. Aluwalia, what did you say? You know, lots of progress have been made, as we always hear at the end of a political speech or address, and more needs to be done.
See, I think, as I really emphasized, you know, peer-to-peer works a lot. You know, if we can grow more educated South Africans, and you're right, political will, the government support, and the parent and guardian guidance together as a coordinated effort with obviously passionate teachers, as you rightly said. These are the 5 big pillars that will help together. It's not just the political leadership. You need passionate teachers around. You need a guardian and parent who needs to go forward with the child in child's grooming. You need a good administrator in the school to help run the school, or a university or a TVET college. So it's a very more surrounding things, and a proper coordination, a proper work, plus a peer-to-peer means child to child, teacher to teacher, and groomingness and willingness to transform South Africa. It has to come from all angles and not just one angle.
Very briefly, Raymond.
Well, it's very difficult. We need the spirit that we have seen when Africa was experiencing problem, when the artists came together and said, we are the world. So that is the spirit that we need today, is that we need to collaborate, we need to cooperate with each other, we need to contribute towards ensuring that we build effective schools and making sure that it's not only one teacher who performs, because children learn over time through many teachers working together as a team. And the department must also make sure that the non-deliverables are being able to be adhered to and respected.
And we'll continue keeping them accountable. Thanks indeed to our panelists, and for you at home as well for joining us. Continue the debate on social media. For now, though, we take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.